you've heard maybe about the Rockefellers in the past. They decided that they were going to make more land with all the debris. So they took the debris. This was a coffer they created around this area, and they made Battery Park City and the financial district. This today is the highest tax area for New York City. So because of that foresight of these people who were so smart at the time, always looking for new adventures and new ways to make money, they actually created more land for New York City. So remember, when Peter Minuet's time, the Hudson River actually came right up to this shore. Now, Battery Park is where there's a fort. And as I said, during the Revolutionary War, that was very important property. The fort is still there today. But Battery Park is a beautiful park where you can go, and that's also where you get the ferry to Liberty Island to see the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island. Okay, so I guess we'll move along. So this is what they created in the 60s and early 70s. And at first, New Yorkers did not like these buildings at all because they were so square and so just straight up. What they really wanted was something like the Empire State Building that had beautiful spires at the top, or the Chrysler Building, which had all the artistic work on the sides. But eventually, New Yorkers came to love the World Trade Centers. It became part of their souls. This is Tower 1, and I image because it has an antenna on the top. And this is World Trade Center 2. I was there with some Boy Scouts one time. It's 110 stories high. It's unbelievably tall, above the clouds on many days. And there's an area where you can get out on the top of the building and look out. I was terrified, and the scouts were all climbing the fence and everything. I said, we're going down. But there's 2 spots where you have to change, or a spot in each of the buildings. Oops, all right, that's fine. You have to change elevators because the elevators could not go all the way to the top. So there's a lobby at like 78, I think, that people had to change to go to the top. Okay, so any questions about where these buildings were? No? Okay. All right, this is an aerial view of the property at the time. The World Trade Centers obviously were very, very important to this area. This was 16 acres. And this was a hotel right here, and then other buildings. There were up to 7 buildings on this property, although building number 7 was actually at the edge, and that was the first building to open up afterwards because it wasn't part of the World Trade Center. It was privately owned. Okay, so you have kind of an idea of what they were. Now, this is how close it all was to the Statue of Liberty. New York Harbor contains the Statue of Liberty as all boats come by it, going into the New York City. Okay, this is the plaza, and I want to talk a little bit more about what's under this plaza. Remember I said they had to go down 7 stories to they had to go to bedrock to anchor the buildings. Well, underneath this whole property, there were stores. There was a mall, a Westfield Mall. There was doctor's offices, dentist offices, grocery stores, pharmacies, everything that you would need, including a post office. The World Trade Center had its own postcode, zip code, because there were so many people. About 50,000 people usually were in the World Trade Centers on any given day. This area was what people loved the most. It's where they had concerts. You could go out and have lunch out on the plaza. If people wanted to gather, they'd say, I'll meet you at the Koenig Sphere, which this is called. It was a gift from Germany, I believe, at the time that the World Trade Centers were being built. And it's beautiful, big gold dome. But this, as I say, was where all the fun came about. But there were many people who took a train from New Jersey under the Hudson River, or from other parts of New Jersey where they took a different train. And they never had to go outside. They would take the train, which was down, and the subways too. They were all, and the buses were all beneath the World Trade Center. And so they would say, they could come to work all day and go home and never be outside unless they made an effort to be out here. So if it was raining, it was perfect because they never had to get wet. We'll come back to the Koenig Sphere later. I told you there was another attack on the World Trade Centers. It was in 1973 in February, and the same group of terrorists tried to bring down Tower 1 by blowing up a truck in the basement with the cars, it was where the garage was. So they drove this truck filled with bomb material, fertilizers and whatever they used, and they left it there, and then they walked out, and it was detonated with a cell phone. So it was a huge explosion in the garage underneath Tower 1. However, only 6 people were killed at that time. 6 people and an unborn baby. 1 woman was pregnant at the time. But this attack, and by the way, my friend Scott Haney, do you watch Scott Haney here in New Haven? Anyway, he was there that day, and he said it took hours and hours for everybody to exit the building. And if you ever look at any of the videotapes of that day, people coming out are covered with soot and smoke and debris. It was a terrifying day for everybody in the buildings that day. But one of the things it did was it hardened their security. And on a monthly basis, in both Tower 1 and Tower 2, they would have fire drills or exit drills so that they could see how fast they could get everybody out of the building. And one of the things that was good for was on 9/11, because so many people did get out. Okay, so this is the day we're here to talk about, and this is where the first plane hit at about the 99th floor. My husband, Dick, was on the 100th floor that day. Between the 99th and 100 was where the Marsh McLennan office was. And I did not know that he was there that day. I thought he was in another office in Midtown Manhattan, halfway up the island, where their headquarters was. But his company had another office here. They also had offices in the South Tower. So, as I say, I was oblivious to that, although it affected all of us. When that plane was seen going into the building, everybody cringed. Nobody who was above the level of impact survived. Because remember I told you the elevators went partway and then up the rest of the way? So anybody that was in the building at that time above the 99th floor, or maybe even the 96th floor, open. And they didn't even have computers on the desks at that time. I'm sorry, they did. I'm thinking back to when it was built. But it was a wide open office. And as I say, all egress was cut off, so nobody could get out. Some people tried to go to the roof where they thought they might be rescued and it was impossible to get a helicopter to the roof. But they died in stairwells because there was no way to get to the roof. It wouldn't have helped them anyway. Here we see the second, this was at 8:46, this was about 9 o'clock. The second plane hit in the South Tower, and it hit lower than the North Tower. However, it hit on the side of the building, not squarely in the middle, so that the egress was still available to people. They could go down the stairs, not the elevators, because the elevators were not working either. But actually, firefighters, I think, were using the elevators for a while to get up. But the stairways here were okay, so more people survived in the South Tower. Also, in the South Tower, after the first Tower 1 was hit, the PA came on and said in the South Tower, "We're okay, stay in your offices." But there were many people who said, I'm going. So they left. Many more people died in the North Tower than in the South Tower. This is when the buildings fell. The North Tower was hit first. It was probably because that plane went in on an angle and cut off the side of the building that it just came down. Both of these buildings came down in 1 minute, I think it is. Maybe it's even less than that. They toppled one floor on top of the other, so they pancaked all the way down to the ground. I want to say it was 10 seconds that they came down, not a minute. When this building came down, it created hurricane force winds. So if you were standing outside of the building, you would have been thrown across the street. The other thing is that on the Richter scale that tells us how big the earthquakes are, it registered on the Richter scale at about 6.7. So after the first building fell, people were terrorized, and it was horrible just to see that building coming down. And we've seen it so many times on videotapes. And then a few minutes later, the North Tower fell. Again, pancaking on itself. This is what it looked like from up above with all the debris. And you know what? It wasn't just smoke. It was paper. It was pieces of desks. It was the concrete. This stuff was thick, thick, thick. And at the time, we were told that it was not hazardous. I couldn't believe that. But our firefighters went in without respirators after this happened to clean up. And firefighters and construction companies, lots of different people went in to clean up. And they are sick now. Many of them have what's called 9/11 illness. This is what it looked like. This was, the Pentagon. So there were 4 planes. And all of these planes, by the way, were taken down with box cutters. They killed staff on the planes to gain access to the cockpit. And this plane was the third one out. I think that left from Newark, New Jersey. No, I'm sorry, that one left from Dulles Airport and turned around and came back. If you're interested in the routes or how they did it, there's lots of literature out there. This is Shanksville, Pennsylvania. This was the 4th plane. And again, people heard on the plane, they were on cell phones and whatever, they knew what had happened to the other planes that had been turned around from the airport. I believe this one left out of Boston, too. Oh, no, this was Newark. And they went west. These were planes that were supposed to go all the way to the West Coast. So they were filled with fuel. And that was one of the things that the hijackers wanted. And they all went out a ways and then turned around and came back. At least the last 2 did. Anyway, the passengers took over the plane. That's what we think. And we're not sure how the plane crashed to the ground, whether the terrorists did it or whether the passengers knew what was going to happen and they just drove the plane to the ground. This plane was probably intended to either go to Congress or the White House. So it was important and they knew that. So they made this courageous effort to bring the plane down so that they couldn't kill our country's leaders. So this is what it looked like. And I was there in March. This happened in September. I didn't go down to New York until March. And on our anniversary, I went. And they had a little platform here for family members just to spend time. And one of the things that everybody did was, write into the railings, when they were there. It was an anniversary. And those platforms are all stored at the memorial in New York. But you can see the Koenig Sphere here. It was damaged, but it was not completely damaged. And I'll tell you the story about that later, too. But one of the things that night when I was there was the bells rang, and they found 3 people, remains of 3 people in the rubble. And most often they only found small pieces, but this time they had found a little bit more. And they would stop. There were 3 ambulances would back up to the site. Firefighters would all put on their helmets and salute, and they put a American flag over each body as they brought it out. And everybody stood there at attention until the bodies were in the ambulances and they were gone. So there was great respect for every part of anybody that they found. And most, as I say, people were. By the way, only about half of the people have been identified. We were fortunate enough, I guess, that they did find a piece of bone of my husband, and they notified us that they had found it, and they could do DNA from my children's DNA. They compared them, and they called and told us that they had conclusive evidence that he was there. Now, that happened in February, so it was almost 6 months later that they found a body part. It's kind of gruesome to think about, but it's now our reality. Again, this is called the pit, where firefighters, as I say, cleaned up little buckets. They did have to bring in heavy equipment to get some of the great big beams out, but for most part, they were dealing with just buckets, getting the debris out. And they were very respectful, as I said. They're all over the site. Okay, the Koenigsberg, a bigger picture of it. And it went to, I'm going to go back a minute. It went back to, oops. Does this take me back? Well, that's all right. Don't look at that yet. The Koenigsberg was sent to Battery Park. Remember I talked about the fort at Battery Park? And it remained there until the World Trade Centers reopened, or the Tower 1 reopened. Okay, so this is what we were doing while all of that debris was being excavated. This is my husband. I hate this picture, but that was the last picture we had of him, a corporate picture. And what we did, my sons did the next day, and family, friends, and relatives, and everybody went down to New York, and we had made up posters, and this was the poster. And you can see these posters today, because we weren't the only ones that were doing it. Everybody had a poster. They were putting them on the trees, cars that were abandoned. The posters were all over Lower Manhattan. We all were hoping that somebody had seen our loved one and would call the number. I took the number off now, but would call and say, are you missing somebody? My husband was very nearsighted, so I thought he had lost his glasses and somebody was leading him around Lower Manhattan, helping him, but that wasn't to be true. I have this picture because I like this picture much, much better. This was Dick with our granddaughter in Hartford Hospital when she was born. After these horrible events, everybody wanted to help. Everybody wanted to do something. I mean, people made donations to organizations that were helping people, but people in New York, and mostly work stopped in New York for a long time, people would gather at every street corner. So months later, there would be people cheering on every street corner. I mean, really, months and months afterwards, waving flags. Anybody that was driving that direction, they knew was going to the World Trade Center site. So it might be families, it might be police, firefighters, rescue workers, whatever. So these people were out there day and night for a long, long time. They took it on as their job to cheer on the city of New York and everybody else. Now we're going backwards. I don't know if you can get back to that picture. Anybody have any questions so far? Nope. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Can I go forward from there? No. Why is that picture there? Okay, that's all right. This is in New Jersey. And you can see the Tower of Light here. Every year on the anniversary, they have these towers of light. Two towers, two streams of light that go up. And this is people in New Jersey remembering 9/11. Now, New Jersey and Connecticut, and New York, obviously, were the three areas where they had lost the most people. Connecticut lost 110 people that day. The little town of Wethersfield, where I live, actually lost 3 people. And now we have a new resident of Wethersfield whose father died that day too. So there's 4 families that are still grieving in the little town of Wethersfield that's 100 miles away from New York. This was immediately after 9/11. Wethersfield, this tight-knit community, all gathered together on what's called the town green, which I live across the street. I'm on the green. And the police estimated that 5,000 people came to this vigil. We had just family and friends that were going to go over to the green and maybe light some candles and sing a few songs, and that was it. And that afternoon, I was not involved with the preparations for it, my friends were, but they called and said, you know, the police had told them that there were going to be more people, so they ought to print more sheets for the songs. So we printed like 200 sheets. And then later on, the police called and said that they were going to be handling parking. And I had no idea why parking was going to be an issue because I was expecting 200 people. And this is a vast area. But in the end, the entire green, which is a mile if you walk around it, was filled with people with their own candles and praying and hoping that we were going to find these people and bring them home. Friends of mine put up these are sheets, but they wrote on them, faith, peace, and hope. And one of our TV stations backlit them in the red, white, and blue that night. It was an amazing evening. Okay, so now we're back to when the World Trade Centers reopened. And I think it was like 2008 that really they opened. This is the area on the memorial. There's 2 separate things. There's the memorial, which is vast, and then there's One World Trade Center now. And there are some other buildings on the outside, the perimeter of the area. It's smaller now than it was when the World Trade Centers were there. But this is the pool that is where Tower 2 stood. And there are not so many people, as you remember I said, that died from the building. But here they have all the people that died in Shanksville, all the people who died in the Pentagon, and obviously from the airplane that hit the building. This was the whole memorial was designed by a man named Michael Irad. He's an architect, and his concept when he was designing was that he was going to have reflecting absence. So this is absence. We have nothing in the middle here except rivulets of water to show that those people are missing from our lives now. Each of the names is cut out from the parapet. Are you planning to go down to no? Okay. There's a wall, and it's actually slanted so that even people with disabilities can touch and feel the wall. And each name is cut out from the brass, I guess it is, that it's made of. The water is heated in the winter and cooled in the summer. Not so much you'd feel like a bath, but it's enough to keep it from freezing in the winter. Sometimes they do have to turn the pools off because the winds create mist in the area and make it very slippery. If you go to the World Trade Center site and see a rose on somebody's, oh, I keep touching that, I'm sorry. If you see a rose on somebody's name, it means that's their birthday. So the staff at the World Trade Center actually do come out every day and put a rose at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning to show that that's their birthday. On November 11th, Veterans Day, Anybody that was here as a veteran will have a yellow rose in their name, and they fit right into the holes in the names. It is a beautiful, beautiful site. All the individual rivulets go down to a center pool where it's absence completely, and they all meet there. And the idea is that they all go up to heaven together. This is the museum. So I encourage everybody to go to the memorial and the museum. The museum, this is just the covering for the museum where you go in. But the museum goes down 7 stories again. So the first thing you do when you get in it is you take an escalator way down to the bottom to bedrock. And they left the walls as they would have been when they were constructed. My husband's name. And there's a tradition. If you reach underneath to the water and rub his name, you've made a connection. So people do that all around the World Trade Center site because it's that connection. That's a Native American tradition, I guess. Okay, so this is every year when they have the reading of the names, and they did it again this year. And somebody, a friend of ours, happened to catch when they were saying Dick's name. Here's those spires of light that I was talking about. They are absolutely beautiful on September 11th when they remember the events. And this is the World Trade Center 1. So this is after the construction has been completed there. World Trade Center 1 was big controversy. Do we want to build a building as high as it was before and be a incendiary for people to come and knock it down again? But people won out, and the people who wanted to build this building, I believe it is privately owned. And the bottom 20 floors are all concrete, so nobody can drive a truck into the building and bring it down. And then there's glass all the way up to the top, and there's 8 sides to the building. So 4 for the World Trade Center 2 and 4 for World Trade Center 1. And there is an observation deck up there. You can go all the way up, and they charge you, but you can go up and see the whole city all around. It's a beautiful spire. And till the top, it's 1,776 feet. Can anybody tell me the significance of that? That's right. 1776 was our year of independence. So that's reflected in the height of the, and just to show you the difference, and these are some of the buildings I said that the people wanted rather than those square boxes or cubes. The Empire State Building, Bank of America Tower, Chrysler Building, and the New York Times, but the One World Trade Center is still taller. It is still, I believe, the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere. There are taller buildings around the world, but not in the Western Hemisphere. This is inside of the memorial, and this is a quote from Virgil, "No day shall erase you from the memory of time." The memorial, the museum is absolutely beautiful, and behind this wall, there's a repository for remains. So all of the remains that have been unidentified, and many were not identified because they didn't have, it took several generations of DNA to identify everybody, but you know, if a piece of bone was out for 6 months, it deteriorated. The DNA would be deteriorated. They actually did get 2 layers of DNA that were still in testing at the time, but they used them, they kind of pushed them ahead and used those to identify a lot of people. But as I say, there are a lot of people that have still not been identified. 974 people died in the buildings that day. Now here's an interesting story. That day, I said that 50,000 people were in the buildings on a regular basis. That day, there were only 25,000. And there are 3 reasons for that. First of all, it was the first day of school in New York. They don't go to school till a little bit later. So many parents who worked there were taking their kids to school. Another was, it was primary day in New York. So businesses would give their employees time off either in the morning or in the afternoon to go vote. So many people would go vote first and then go to work. And the third reason was there was a football game on the night before that went into triple overtime in Colorado. So New Yorkers would be watching it on TV, and it was like 1 or 2 a.m. before the game was over, so they were going to come into work a little bit late the next day. So that actually saved 25,000 people's lives. I hear a lot of times people will say, my friend was supposed to be there and wasn't. How lucky was that? All right, so this is another image of the memorial. And there's a new building here. It's called the Public Arts Center, I think. But this is the North Tower here. So almost all of the people that are named on the North Tower are there because they were in that building. Remember I said that a lot more people died in the North Tower. And this is called the Oculus. And it's where the new train station is underneath. So, you know, I go to New York frequently, and it was really heartwarming for me to be able to stop on the subway at the World Trade Center stop after all these years. Otherwise, you had to go all the way around before then. But that's where the PATH trains come in now, where the subway comes in, and where the buses come in. So everything is back in order where it should be. The Oculus up above has very high-end shopping, and it's beautiful inside. It's just gorgeous. This was designed by a different architect, Salvatore Calavetrata, I think is his name. But he had big plans for this building. He wanted it to be like wings of a dove for peace, and he wanted the wings to actually open, and it's stationary, but it is a very beautiful building. This is the top of the museum, and these are some of the other buildings that were on the perimeter of the World Trade Center site. Okay, so what did we do? We created in Wethersfield a 9/11 Memorial Sports Center, and it's got a gym and a meeting room and a fitness room. We took over a part of a building in Wethersfield that really needed renovation. So $1.5 million later that we had raised, this came to fruition. And we also were the very first nonprofit organization in the world to get pieces of steel from the World Trade Center. I wanted to incorporate pieces of steel. So we have one on the outside, and then we have a different piece inside on a wall. And both of them are beautiful and treasured by the town of Wethersfield. So I just try to get pictures of, and we had after-school programs in this building, and this is just some of the kids engaged in a program. To this day, that building is booked almost every hour of the day. There's teams, the basketball teams that come in the evening. It's an instructional gym. It's a little bit smaller. Maybe it's about the same size as this gym. But teams come in and practice all day, and there's men's teams at night, ladies' teams who come to just use the gym for their teams. Okay, I guess I'm done. Anybody have any questions? No? Think about it for a minute. Okay, you have a question. Here, take the mic.
I didn't know you were going to be here today. I was a rescue worker at Ground Zero, and I brought my respirator in today and my hard hat to show my class. And I happened to be off this period, and I came in. I didn't bring it up in my room, but I just wanted to tell you.
Did you have the respirator on at the time?
Well, yes. What happened was when we got there as a volunteer, we couldn't go past the Jacob Javits Center. We had to get out of our cars or out of our jitney and walk the entire way. Me, being retired from the Air Force, already had hazmat training. I put mine on as soon as I started the trek because I saw the clouds. Yeah. And thank God I am not sick today.
Good.
But thanks to my respirator.
Thank you. Thank you you for sharing that. Oh, thank you. But there are many people in New York, firefighters and rescue workers, as he said, volunteers. They worked 24/7. They had big, huge lights on the area, and they just kept working all night long. That went on for 9 months. At the 9-month mark, which was May the next year, they actually had a ceremony where they brought out the very last piece of steel, which is a huge piece, and it's in the museum today. Firefighters and rescue workers all signed it, and it was brought out in a parade. It was lovely. But this gentleman was smart enough and had the equipment to actually protect himself. But many rescue workers just had no mask on at all, and then after a while maybe a cloth mask, but they were not enough to. Remember I said that all of the particulates in this cloud and in the dust were concrete and pieces of desks and pieces of everything, computers, yes, at that time. So it was not just smoke. It was stuff that everybody was breathing in. Okay, any questions from you kids? Go ahead.
How old were you and your husband when they finished building the towers?
Oh, how old were we? That's way back. I was probably 15, 20, maybe not even that, 14, 15, when the towers opened. Yeah. I'm sorry, no. The towers opened in probably, I don't know. I was very young. So I wasn't paying too much attention to what was going on in New York, except that we all knew that this excitement was building. They were building these incredible buildings that were the highest in the world at the time. And they were so strange looking, but everybody wanted to see them and to go there. Yeah, so years later I took the Boy Scouts there. It was 1970, I believe, that they opened. 1970? Yeah. Anyway, so anybody else have any questions? You know, one of the questions I always get is, don't you hate the people that did this? And remember, these were young men who basically were deprived of everything in life before this happened. They lived in a desert. Their families were very, very poor. They didn't have enough food. They didn't have homes to live in. And along came this Al-Qaeda organization that said, you know, we'll give you all of that, and then we'll take care of your families as well if you do this. And then they trained them in Afghanistan, and they came to the United States to live for a while and to learn how to fly planes. They didn't care about landing planes. They just wanted to learn how to handle them when they were in the air. It was well planned. But do I hate those young men? No. I think that they were taken advantage of. Somebody else, I might hate the leaders of their organization, but I don't actually hate those people. And I really, really hope that young people today in Afghanistan and other Middle Eastern countries, and I have been there, and it is desolate. There's no, I mean, every 20 miles there might be a building, but the desert is unforgiving, and they lived there. They lived in cities maybe, but again, the cities were in the middle of the desert, so they really did not have, they were deprived. But no, I don't hate them. I wish that they had had better lives and they had had better direction in their lives. Okay, nobody has any other questions? Yes? Wait a minute.
Oh, my question is, so you know there was an attack before on the World Trade Center, so how come those people weren't like stopped before?
Okay, good question. Actually, remember I said they filled the truck with bomb material and then left and detonated it? Well, that was a rented truck. They had rented the truck in New Jersey. So afterwards, they got a little cocky and they thought, oh, we should get the money back from the rental. So they went back to the rental agency and they told them that the truck had been stolen or wrecked or something. But the FBI were waiting for them. So they actually did get arrested. So there's some of those people are still in jail today. So those were not the actual people who carried this out, but the same organization, same idea. You know, it's very hard for me to understand why people around the world hate the United States. I love to travel, so I've gone all over the world, and I don't necessarily tell people that I was involved with 9/11 or that my family was. And, you know, I have come to love people around the world. So I don't know, and I don't come across people who have that hatred. So I'm hoping it's not something that's pervasive. Okay, I guess you guys have to go. Hold on.
Thank you, Mrs. Keene. Hold on, everyone, just a quick second. Let's give a West Shore big thank you for Mrs. Keene sharing her story and all the work she does with the 9/11 Sports Center on behalf of her husband's foundation. Thank you so much, Mrs. Keene. Appreciate it. Okay, if you guys can get up, you're dismissed. Go on to your next class. Thank you.